The Tribeca loft sat shrouded in pre-dawn darkness, the kind of heavy silence that settles over New York City in those rare hours when even the city that never sleeps takes a breath. Robert De Niro stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the skyline he'd known for over 7 decades, a cup of cold coffee forgotten in his hand. Behind him, curled on the leather sofa, a sleek black cat named Stella watched with luminous green eyes. She was 15 years old now, ancient by feline standards, and she'd been with Bobby through the hardest years of his life, years that began in 2003 and stretched into the late 2010s, years that had tested everything he thought he knew about himself, about family, about survival. Stella rose, stretched with the deliberate grace only cats possess, and padded across the hardwood floor to wind herself around Bobby's ankles. The gesture was so familiar, so consistent, that Bobby barely registered it consciously, but his hand moved automatically to scratch behind her ears, and something in his chest loosened slightly, the tightness that had become his constant companion during these brutal years. "Morning, Stella," he murmured, his voice gravelly from disuse. It was 4:30 a.m., and he'd been awake for hours. Sleep had become elusive, another casualty of the chaos his life had become. Bobby had found Stella, or rather, Stella had found him, in the spring of 2003, during what should have been a triumphant period of his life. He was 60 years old, one of the greatest actors of his generation, with 2 Oscars and countless iconic roles behind him. He had money, respect, legacy. He should have been content. Instead, his second marriage was disintegrating. His relationship with his adult children from his first marriage was strained and complicated. And his father, Robert De Niro Sr., the artist whose approval Bobby had spent a lifetime seeking, had died in 1993, leaving behind unresolved tensions and unanswered questions that would haunt Bobby for decades. He'd been walking through Tribeca late one night, unable to sleep when he heard the sound, a weak, desperate mewing coming from a dumpster behind a restaurant. He'd found a tiny black kitten, maybe 6 weeks old, alone and starving. Bobby had never been a cat person. Dogs maybe, but cats seemed too independent, too aloof for someone who already struggled with emotional distance. Still, looking at that tiny, helpless creature, he'd felt something shift. He'd scooped up the kitten, tucked her inside his jacket, and taken her home. "You look like a Stella," he'd told her that first night, thinking of his grandmother, of strength wrapped in small packages, of survivors who persevered against odds. The vet estimated Stella was about 6 weeks old, undernourished but otherwise healthy. With proper care, she'd thrive. Bobby threw himself into that care with an intensity that surprised him, researching cat nutrition, buying the best food, setting up a space in his loft that became Stella's territory. His friends were bemused. "Bobby De Niro has a cat?" They'd joke, "What's next, you gonna start doing rom-coms?" He would eventually, but that was still years away. But something about Stella worked for Bobby in ways he couldn't fully articulate. She was independent but affectionate, self-sufficient but appreciative of care, present but not demanding. She didn't need him to be Robert De Niro, legendary actor. She just needed him to be the guy who fed her and occasionally let her sleep on his lap. In those early years, Stella became a fixture in Bobby's life, present during script readings in his home office, sleeping on the radiator while he paced and memorized lines, greeting him at the door in her own aloof, feline way when he returned from shoots. And then 2004 arrived, and everything got harder. His marriage to Diane Abbott had ended in 1988, and his relationship with Tukey Smith had been complicated. Now his second marriage to Grace Hightower was falling apart. They'd been married since 1997, had a son together, and on paper everything looked stable. In reality, they were drowning in incompatibility and unmet expectations. The divorce filing in 2004 was acrimonious and public in ways Bobby hated. His privacy, always fiercely guarded, was violated by tabloid coverage of custody disputes, financial disagreements, allegations, and counter-allegations. The man who had built a career on control found himself in a situation where he controlled nothing. During this period, Stella became his constant. When Bobby came home from brutal meetings with lawyers, from court appearances that left him drained and angry, Stella was there. Not offering sympathy or pity, cats don't do that, but offering presence. She'd be on the sofa or the windowsill, or her favorite spot on top of the refrigerator, and her very existence was a reminder that life continued, that there were still routines and rhythms beyond the chaos of divorce. Bobby started talking to Stella during this time. Not conversations exactly, but monologues, working through his anger and confusion and hurt by voicing it to an audience that wouldn't judge or interrupt or offer unwanted advice. "She's saying I'm a bad father," Bobby told Stella one night, pacing his loft while the cat watched from the sofa. "After everything I've done, everything I've provided, she's saying I'm not present enough. Maybe she's right. Maybe I'm not. I don't know how to be. My father wasn't, and his father wasn't. It's not an excuse. It's just what I know." Stella blinked slowly, that cat gesture of acknowledgement that's almost like a hug. The custody battle over his son, Elliot, was particularly brutal. Bobby loved his kids, all of them, from both marriages, but he'd never been an openly affectionate father, never been the type to express emotions easily. That distance, functional in his work, was damaging in his family life. The court proceedings forced him to confront this, to articulate his feelings in legal settings, to justify his choices as a parent. It was excruciating for someone as private and controlled as Bobby. Through 2004 and 2005, as the divorce dragged on, Bobby's mental health deteriorated. He didn't call it depression. Bobby's generation didn't really do that, but that's what it was. Difficulty sleeping, loss of interest in work, irritability, a pervasive sense that nothing mattered. He took roles during this period. He always worked. Work was his therapy, but his heart wasn't in it. He was going through the motions, delivering professional performances that lacked the fire and commitment of his earlier work. His friends noticed. Scorsese called him out during a dinner. "Bobby, where are you? You're here, but you're not here." "I'm fine," Bobby had snapped, defensive.
"You're not fine."
"I've known you for 40 years. You're not fine." But Bobby couldn't talk about it, couldn't articulate the emptiness he felt, except to Stella. The cat became his therapist, his confidant, his anchor to routine. Feeding her, cleaning her litter box, playing with her occasionally, these small acts of care kept him tethered to something beyond his own spiral of self-recrimination. In 2006, he and Grace reconciled. The divorce was called off, they tried again, committed to making it work. Bobby was relieved, not because the marriage was fixed, it wasn't, but because the public spectacle could end, because he could retreat back into privacy. But the reconciliation was fragile, built on hope more than resolution. The underlying issues remained, and Bobby, exhausted from the previous 2 years, didn't have the energy to address them properly. Stella, now 3 years old, had grown into a dignified cat with an independent streak and occasional moments of surprising affection. She'd developed rituals with Bobby, morning greetings where she'd chirp at him until he acknowledged her. Evening sessions where she'd claim his lap while he read scripts. Late-night companionship when insomnia kept him pacing the loft. These rituals became increasingly important as Bobby's life remained complicated. His relationship with Grace improved somewhat, but never reached the stability either of them had hoped for. His children were growing up, navigating their own complicated relationships with a father who loved them, but struggled to show it in conventional ways. And then 2011 brought a new crisis that would define the next phase of Bobby's hardest years. His mother, Virginia Admiral, died at age 91. Bobby's relationship with his mother had been complicated, full of love, certainly, but also resentment and unresolved issues. She and his father had divorced when Bobby was young, and Virginia had raised him in Greenwich Village, exposing him to art and culture, while also projecting her own artistic ambitions onto him. Her death hit Bobby harder than he'd anticipated. Not just the grief of losing a parent, but the sudden awareness that he was now the oldest generation, that there was no one left to seek approval from, no one left who remembered him as a child rather than an icon. For weeks after Virginia's death, Bobby was unreachable emotionally. He fulfilled his professional obligations. He was shooting a film, but he was mechanical, distant, going through motions. At home, he'd sit for hours staring at nothing, trapped in memories and regrets. Stella responded to his grief in her own way. She became more present, more physically affectionate than usual. She'd sleep directly next to him, instead of at the foot of the bed. She'd seek him out during the day, as if checking on him. She'd purr, that deep, thrumming vibration that's scientifically proven to reduce stress and promote healing. "You know something's wrong, don't you?" Bobby said to her one night, the first words he'd spoken aloud in days. "You're keeping an eye on me, making sure I don't disappear completely." Stella headbutted his hand, the feline gesture of affection and reassurance. The processing of his mother's death led Bobby into deeper reflection about his father, about the complicated legacy of Robert De Niro Sr. His father had been a talented artist, a gay man in an era when that meant hiding, a creative soul who'd never achieved the recognition he deserved. Bobby had spent his life simultaneously honoring his father's artistic legacy and being angry at him for not being more present, more traditional, more fatherly. In 2014, Bobby decided to make a documentary about his father, remembering the artist, Robert De Niro Sr. It was a way of processing decades of complicated feelings, of finally having the conversation with his father that they'd never managed when the man was alive. The making of that documentary was emotionally brutal. Bobby had to confront his own role in the distance between them, had to acknowledge his father's struggles and sacrifices, had to reconcile the artist he'd admired with the father he'd resented.